And begin. We are recording.
So we're on page Ayin Daled. I believe we're in the 9th mimer here in the Hemshech, and we're speaking about two different types of Hamshachas that come down from above. One is called Sod Shoresh, and one is called Sod Tosefes. The secret of the drawing down from the root versus drawing down from the addition to the root. Drawing down to the root, we said that it's the idea of limited light coming in to the worlds. And even though in the world of Atzilus, the light that comes in is the mahus of the or of the kav, it's actually godliness itself. Nonetheless, the light continues down. It goes. It splits into what we call the higher world and the lower worlds. The very fact that it's not there's something called the higher world and the lower world, but there's distinctions between one level and another. It means you're dealing with limited light. So we went into explanation at some detail last time about what exactly is going on in the world of Atzilus, that it's the mahus of the or, but really it was just a introduction to explain how there's differences between one world and another world when it comes to this limited aspect of light which is drawn down in a way of limitation, which is called Sod Shoresh. We'll continue that conversation. Actually, we'll take it from Ayin Aleph. So that's Atzilus, that you have the mahus of the kav, you have the actual elokus that you can see. His havus biyah, when it comes to the bring into existence of the lower three worlds, Bria, Tzir, and Asiyah, Hulios b'chiris mitzi yesh v'davar. The purpose of this movement is that it brings in the existence of a self, of a yesh, and a feeling of otherness. You don't anymore have the experience of the mahus of elokus, the existence of God experienced. And that's the union of Bria. That's why it's called Bria. The word Bria itself means a creation, means something new which feels itself separate from its creator, which again is not the experience in Atzilus. And this type of feeling of self cannot come about while you simultaneously have a revelation of the infinite light. But rather only from a concealment of the creator from the created being. The ability to give the created being a feeling of self must come at the expense of hiding godliness. You can't have both at the same time. Because if God is revealed, you don't feel the creation. The godly light hides. And only through its hiding can it come about an existence of something, of a bria, of a creation. And the general coming into existence of this world of creation, it only comes from a shine of godliness, which is actually called a shine of a shine. Why is it called a shine of a shine? Because even what's going on in Atzilus is only a shine. It's just that when you have a shine of a shine, what does it mean, a shine of a shine? Imagine if you have, a ray, just a mere ray of the sun, and then you only have a ray of that ray. So the same manner of contraction, the same difference between the size of the sun and its ray is the same amount of contraction between the ray and the next ray down. And there's an infinite contraction. So the godliness is so hidden back that it's basically hiding itself and allows the creation to experience itself. Which means it's Eino B'chinis Ha'ora Atzmi D'Atzilus Klal. It no longer has that essential light of Atzilus. What we have here now is what we talk about, the idea of throwing the curtain over the window. That the light that comes through the curtain, it's already not the same light. Even though through a window, I only have a small ray of the sunlight, but at least it's the sunlight. But when I throw a curtain over it, then the light that comes out on the other side of the curtain, it's not even sunlight anymore. It's basically called Or Shel Tolda. It's like a new creation, a new birth that comes out of the original light. And this is what goes into the world of Bria, hiding the light of Elokus to make the feeling of self. And how does it come about? Through Malchus of Atzilus. This is the where the curtain falls, the lowest point of Atzilus. Shenikra Mare Demus Kavod Havaya. The Hainu B'chinas Ha'ara de Ha'ara. And it's already, the Malchus is called Mar'ed Demus Kavod Havaya. In other words, it's just an image of the appearance of the glory of Hashem. It's not the glory of Hashem anymore. It's just an image of the appearance of the glory of Hashem. So it's already contracted in Malchus itself, and therefore what comes out is just an array of a ray, as we says elsewhere. Even the shine from Zah to Malchus, which is for the sake of bringing forth the Bria, Hurak ma medregas hayoser tachtona de Zah. So this too, you're only using from the lowest aspects of Zah. Since we're going to go into Malchus is going to already start to conceal the light to go into Bria. Even the light which is sectioned off from Zah to go into Malchus is already from the lowest aspects of Malchus. Dahainu rak bechinas nehi shebo. And we spoke about this before. This is the idea of the back-to-back relationship. That when it comes to creating the world, the back of Zah alone is connected to the back of Malchus, which means the back of Zah means the lowest part. Zah itself has, let's say, intellect, emotion, and action. Right, it has its own little Seder Ishtalshlus inside of it, and the lowest parts of Zah, they are what are released in order to send light into Malchus for the sake of creating the world.
And we're talking about Malchus of Atzilus?
Yes,
okay.
Because
then Bria is coming there.
From in there.
Sorry, what page is it? Does Malchus of Atzilus become Kesser of Bria?
Yes, it does. What it means, so in other words, even when you're coming already from Zah, before you even get to Malchus, you're dealing with the lowest aspects of Zah, which is called the Nehi of Zah. What's the Nehi? Netzach Hod Yesod. The lowest three levels. You do it, the Nehi de Zah Naisim Mochin L'Nukva. As it's known that from the lowest aspect of Zah, it becomes the brains, the highest aspect of Nukva. In other words, from the leftovers, the smallest dimensions of what the highest world can understand, that becomes the source and the highest realm of intellect of what the lower world can understand. Mm-hmm.
If the Malchus creates, is the Malchus of Atzilus the Kesser of Bria, or is there a difference between the Kesser Bria and the Malchus?
Same thing.
So it's, wow.
Yeah. And he says here that Bechinas Nehi hen what's called Labar Migufa, right? That the Nehi, Netzach Hod Yesod, they're called outside the body. In other words, what do the Nehi represent? They represent the genitalia, basically, right? So that's the idea that you're not anymore dealing with the actual person. You're dealing with something that flows out of the person and is already shaykh to the outside. In other words, for giving birth, right? So just like in a person, I guess when you give birth, it's just a simple seed, right? So even though maybe it has all the information of the brain and it sort of contains like a little miniature of the person, at the end of the day, what actually comes out in order that's able to exit the body in order to create this procreation situation is just the lowest aspects, a simple seed. So this is called bar megufa, outside the body, i.e. it's the lowest aspect of Zah. It's not even part of Zah itself, it's outside the body of Zah. And that's what comes over to flow into Malchus, which will eventually create Bria. She'einu b'chinas atzmius de Zah. It's not the essential Zah, because that's already too much light in order to filter through Malchus to create a feeling of separateness, which is going to take place in Bria. V'zeu ma shenizbar le'el, da'or de Zah mis'alim b'chinas acharona shabo. And that's what we explained in the previous mimer. We were saying that the light of Zah becomes concealed in its lowest aspects. We talked about the idea of the teacher giving over a mashal, giving over a metaphor. That when he wants to teach the student the metaphor, he has to essentially hide all of the vast understanding that he has and contract it into some little tiny story about apples and oranges. And so he's hiding his essential light and he's containing himself all inside of his smallest aspect that he has, something which is relatable to the receiver. And that's called Bechinas Nehi. That's what it means. It's outside the body. It's not the actual mind and the intellect of Zah. It's some foreign substance that Zah is sort of dressing up in, which is outside of its body, much like a seed of a person. It's not the person. It's some seed that sort of all the true depth of the person kind of crawls inside, and the seed is like a mushal. Right? You put the entirety of the person inside of some foreign object. That's what it means, outside the body.
Netzach Hod Yesod is outside the body?
Yeah.
What's the body? You're saying
The body is
both in the body and
the body is the midos chesed gvura tiferes basically.
and that's Chassidus is okay.
It already represents outside. In other words, in general, you have three parts. You have intellect, chabad, emotions, chagas, and the nehim is the idea of the expression of those things. So if you're expressing it, it means you're already going outside, just into some other realm, which means the lowest dimension. And again, the real metaphor for it is the idea of contracting yourself into this muscle. And what does it do? It makes it so the real essential light of Zah does not shine. Because then it would be too much light and you couldn't create Bria. So if you have hashpah that comes directly from the midos, then it's essentially it's called a close relationship. We talked about this in the last class as well. There's something called a close and a far ability to express yourself. And over there we're talking about the difference between the light and the vessels. And we said whenever you have light, the notion of light is that it's clinging always to its source. So even if you're going to have a big light and it contracts and then you reveal only a smaller light, a ray, and then it contracts again, you reveal only another smaller light. At the end of the day, you're always revealing something. The original is putting itself out there and making it clear that it's coming towards you. And it's revealing the original in some way. Okay, you have less of it, but at least it's a projection towards you. The way the vessels work is quite the opposite. They have what's called a devekis bilti nikeres, which means an unrecognizable devekis. Light has a recognizable devekis to its source. Whenever you see light, you see it's coming out of its source. It's sort of like a pointing to its source and saying, I come from here. Vessels, they work the opposite way. Their expression is that they show a richuk makum, they show a distance from their source. So when you see the vessel, what you're seeing is something that looks like it's independent.
I know there must have been a creator.
Not necessarily.
And sometimes vessels even tell you about a creator. You see a painting like, oh, that's a Van Gogh, and you look at it here.
It's different though than, let's say, talking to someone, and getting their light sort of. In other words, when you're talking to someone, you see it coming out of you.
Right. You see it actively.
Yeah, you see it's coming out of the creator. The vessel, maybe you know how to creator, but that's already. You're talking about sort of the theoretical. In other words, the way that Hashem creates His vessels in such a way that it feels as though they do not have a source. That's the whole point of vessels. Even though you have a creator, you don't feel any connection to this creator, right? In other words, where the reality is the creator is creating you every second
and that is
with a light which is flowing into you, and you're not disconnected from you. You're not somewhere else, and the creator's somewhere else, and you're sort of hanging out independent. But it looks like that. It looks like you have your own spot, and he's over there somewhere. Why is that? Because the way that vessels present themselves is in a way where they're not in an obvious connection with their source. And the same thing is true with a painting. In other words, okay, the person's emotions were invested into this thing, and maybe you can tell his personality, but the truth is it's far away from him. And it's not obvious that this person is right now connected with this thing. It's across the world. So the idea is the same way with the midos in general are like light. So if there would be a direct hashpah from the midos chesed gvura tiferes of Zah and not from nehi, then it would be a recognizable devekis, a recognizable clinging of all the things that were coming out of it, and therefore again, if something is recognizably part of God, it doesn't feel like a world. It doesn't feel like it has itself. So that aspect of the sort of the light type of flow, it had to be held back even at the level from Zah to Malchus, so that the eventual creation of Bria would feel like it's independent. Right, it has to be created in a way of what's feel like a devekus which is not recognizable.
So already in that
richuk of distance. What's that?
So already in that Tzfat it has its own entity. You said the revelation
Netzach
of
Hod
vessels
Yisod is already the idea
Malchus.
of outside the body. What does it mean outside the body? A feeling of distance from the body, right? So that's the same idea.
Already, do you
What's that?
Notice the spheres there already been Netzach Hod? Because once you recognize that it's different, then there's obviously separation. There's obviously Kalim maybe. He's telling you
no, but
only by Malchus.
the difference is you recognize the kelim of all the spheros, but the idea is that what type of hashpah comes out of netzach hod yesod versus that which comes out of chesed gevurah tiferes.
Right.
One is close and one is far.
And when you're far, that's when you notice vessels.
So because the lower worlds are receiving only from netzach hod yesod, they are not automatically feeling close to their source. They're already in a sense where even their source is far, is a certain feeling of far from its source. How much more so the product of the source is far from the source. In other words, let me just explain one more time. What does it mean, this idea of the vessels are created in a way of distance and not clearly recognizable? So you go back to the sort of source of the vessels. The source of the vessels is in the Rashimo. These letters, like these infinite letters, we talk about the luchos, but they're really not there, they're bit of metzias, right? So all of a sudden, what comes out from those letters is sort of kelim, the feeling of vessels of Atzilus. The feeling of vessels of Atzilus, they don't show that they came from these previous letters, right? They show that they're independent. And then vessels of Bria, let's say, are going to come from the vessels of Atzilus. They don't show themselves they came from the vessels of Atzilus. They look like they're independent. So whereas the light, on the contrary, each light down the pike, it's always showing how I feel like I'm connected to the world above me. So the same thing is true when it comes to Netzach Hod Yesod. They're already like an aspect of outside. They're already in themselves a feeling of distance from Chesed Gevurah Tiferes. So therefore the next step from them is another step of distance. And what they create therefore is a feeling of separateness in Bria. Is that clear, more or less?
Yeah.
Are we still in like the spiritual world in God's mind? Have we even come to this?
Yes, we're in the spiritual world. Yes.
We're in the spiritual world in this world? Like,
Nope.
like a vessel. When you say a vessel, we're not talking about a chair.
We're not. We're talking about spiritual vessels. Okay. Okay, so if the hashpah came from the midos themselves, chesed gevurah tiferes, as opposed to nehi, lo haya efshar lios mizeh ishabus yesh. You would never have created a feeling of self. We would always created a feeling of devekis to the source. And therefore, as we said, Zah has to take away its essential light. And shine only its most external aspect, which is what's called, again, levar migufo, outside of its own body. Which means excluding itself from its essential light. So that it won't be in a state of too much revelation. But so that's what's already happening in Zah itself. In other words, before it even gets to the realm of Malchus, there's already dealing with only the external aspect. So it's the external aspect of Zah that goes to Malchus. Now you're in Malchus itself. So the whole idea of Malchus is a total removal of light. Right? What Malchus does is, it's again this idea of this muscle. All it does is removing light. Let's look at our famous analogy that we've used several times. The idea when you have the calcium inside of the kumkum, right? You have water, and when you evaporate the water, the calcium appears suddenly. When you didn't see it there before. You see what I'm saying? I don't know if you in where you live, you have this problem. But if you burn away all the water in the hot water urn, you wind up with like all this calcium stuck to the sides. There's rocks in there. When it was all lit, all the water was there. You didn't see any of these rocks. Where was it? So the idea is when you remove light, you reveal certain aspects which were hidden inside the light that were not. You couldn't see them when the light was shining.
So you're not suggesting that all of the light is removed. You're saying there's still always in this distillation.
Right. It's not
an element.
Yes.
Still there.
There's an element which is still there. It's the total external. Because really, theoretically, even the calcium has some light in it. Right. It's the fact that it's there at all means something is energizing it. Some aspect of light is energizing it. If it was really nothing, like the Tzimtzum Rishon, there's nothing. So the fact that there's kalim, the kalim themselves have some light in them and the goof, buff them up so they have some goof to them. But it's a mamish tiny amount of light which is just sufficient to give life force to the kalim themselves.
It's totally unrecognized to the earlier light.
It's totally unrecognized. That's exactly right. It's totally unrecognized to the earlier. That's what he calls, suddenly, it's not God anymore. It's a creation. It's a world. Totally unrecognizable to the earlier light. So that already began in Zah. Zah already was working with its external part. But when it goes through Malchus, Malchus removes entirely anything having to do with it being a godly light. And it turns into Pashat Nivroim, creations.
So how do you mentioned that the light always refers back to its source. When you look at the calcium, how do you see its source in the light?
No, you don't. That's the point. Because it's not that from Atzilus to Bria, the move is in what's called in the Darech Richuk, right? In Atzilus and before Atzilus, everything's sort of still within the realms of the Orient Sof. There's still Gilus, still revelation. Even to some degree between the Midos and Nehi in Zah, you still have some aspect of revelation. But once you go to the next stage, the whole thing works now that you're not dealing with a revelation of light, you're dealing with a contraction of light. And that's called Richuk. In other words, the Kalim are what's pronounced now. You're now dealing with an expression that the thing that comes out does not show a recognizable relationship with its source. Up until that point, more or less, there was a recognizable relationship with its source. That's why all of Atzilus is still called the worlds of the Ein Sof, because it's still obvious that the Mahus of Elokus is shining here.
But at Malchut, you no longer have the link to its source of the light. So the light within Malchut is no longer shining towards its source. You can't recognize it.
And that's what you call him the calcium?
Yes. And that's right. That's what the Melech is. What's the Indian of a Melech? His Indian, his Midah is Hisnasus, raised up. That the idea of a king is that his definition of him is he's higher and raised up than all the other people in the kingdom. So this is what Hashem did. He basically made himself removed from the kingdom, so that whatever is going on in Malchus is not perceptible, is not perceived by the kingdom. So it's all the other spheres is a move of like revelation. Just what? It's a minimized revelation or minimized revelations. You can see, but you can see a little bit less. When it comes to Malchus, the direction changes. The action of revelation is one of pulling away. It's not one of showing you something. It's one of hiding something, like a king, whose definition is, I don't know who you are. You're so much infinitely greater than me. Then there's this distance between us. That's the definition of. So when Hashem calls himself a king, it's not like himself calling himself Chesed or Gevurah, where he's showing you his stuff. He's like, look what I can do. When he shows you the king, he's like, look what you'll never be. Look what you cannot have. Because this is what removed from you essentially. So all of a sudden, it creates a distance which did not exist before. A gap, which did not, and that gap is the gap of the gap of the creator between the created beings. So that's kind of what he's trying to describe here. Like the action of Malchus is fundamentally different than the action of all the other spheros. Because it's an opposite tenua of revelation. It's a revelation of concealment, as opposed to a revelation of revelation.
It's a transformation.
Yeah.
Is it more divine?
What's that?
Is it like higher?
It is in a sense higher. It has it. But why? Because having an unrecognized this idea that light shows its source, whereas vessels don't show their source, right? And they're like a revelation of something that you can't see. So they really capture God's true essence more. Because the truth is you can't ever know God. So light, while it's showing you, it's kind of lying to you. Because at the end of the day, whatever you're going to see, if you can see it, it's not him. Because he's unseeable. So the vessels whose job it is to show you something which is, so to speak, not God, and they withhold God from you, and they're showing you a darkness and a separation, it's actually more akin to this true essence of God, which is dark, unknowable, and unknown. So while what they're showing you is a little bit of a letdown, because you see distance, you see self, you see the opposite of revelation of God, the truth is that distance and self and the opposite of revelation of God is more akin to his actually essence, which is unknowable and unrevealable. So darkness is in a sense higher than light. Therefore the revelation of darkness is a higher revelation than the revelation of light.
So it's the darkness that comes out of light.
It's the what I don't know what you mean by that. It's the dark. In other words, in Hashem himself, there's like two aspects. He has his unknowable true self, and then he has his attempt to reveal that self. That attempt to reveal that self doesn't work. Why? Because his true self is really unknowable. So if you're going to see anything, it's like a proof that you're not seeing him, because he cannot be seen. You follow what I'm saying? So light is on one side Hashem's sort of attempt in kindness to try and let you know who he is. But the reality is you can never know who he is. And that part, he also shows you. That he shows you that you can never know who he is. How? He reveals darkness. He reveals his removedness from you. And what's the experience that you have when he reveals his removedness? He reveals his removedness from you. You have this sense of self. Right? When he takes himself away, which is essentially a revelation of his true essence, what you're left with is your feeling of self. Because what is that equal to? A non-feeling him. You get this or no? When he's kind of shining his aspect of not being seen, it's a funny thing to say. He's revealing you his ability to not be seen. So it comes out that you exist, because you exist means I don't see him. But the source of that revelation comes from the very essence, which is the aspect of himself, which cannot be seen, which is unknowable, the highest. And that's why we ultimately say that the lowest places where Hashem is most concealed, it's actually being generated by the very essence of Hashem. Kiyadua. Yeah.
Okay, so when you realize this, that the concealment is the revelation that you can't ever really know God, is that light coming from the darkness? I mean, when we talk about
that's like a transformation of darkness into light, basically.
Right. And so that, when we talk about the three types of light, this being the highest, this is it.
Yeah, I would say so. Okay. Anyway, so Malchus further contracts itself. And this is the Inyan of Helam v'Hester Aboda Me'anivra. And all of a sudden you have this removedness, makes that the creators on one side, and suddenly the creations are on the other side. You didn't have that experience in the world of Atzilus. There was no creations. Because the creator was revealed, there was no creation. So now he shows you his power to conceal himself. He ultimately shows you that by making creations.
The big Simpson.
So like Shlomo was saying, there is light in them, otherwise they wouldn't be, but the light that's in them is completely concealed inside of them. In other words, they don't see it as godly light, they see it as just themselves. They don't realize, and it's not because they're fools, it's because Hashem is hiding himself from them, that they don't realize what they're made of is divine light. They think that they're just like an animal or a man walking around, totally independent from God. That's an awesome power of God, that he's able to do that, to hide himself like that.
But you're not talking about humans thinking that. You're talking about something else thinking that?
Even angels have that experience. Yes, in the world of Bria.
But don't they also see that they're connected at the same time?
But into the state that they believe themselves to be an angel, a messenger of God, they already feel that there's something other than God himself. And that means that God is hiding. Anytime you have an existence of a being, it means God is not revealing himself, because you wouldn't experience anything but God if he was revealing himself. So while they meditate frequently, the angels, and they come to the realization all the time that they feel themselves, it's because there's a flow of divinity inside of them. So that's what they've got going on for them that we don't. They're aware that Hashem is hiding inside of them, at least. But there's still a them, and there's still the hiding God inside of them. They still have this dichotomy. It's just that they are constantly in a state of repairing it by nullifying themselves to God. Whereas as you go lower, we forget more and more and more until the point we just feel like we're literally independent. We too, like angels, could constantly be reminding ourselves and meditating on the truth of the reality that we are being enlivened by God. But because we're further down the pike, the concealment is even deeper, and it's not clear to us, not obvious to us, unless we do a tremendous amount of work in that department. In other words, the mahus of the light of Atzilus, that it is the sun ray mamish, that is no longer by them. And therefore they don't feel themselves to be a piece of God. And that's where all of a sudden you get this notion of creation being a thing. Now that's we were just talking about the concept of generally bria, as a whole they share this problem, if you will. But if you want to get into them themselves, this is what we just stumbled into. That in the higher realms of Bia, which is Bria, there is a shine of godliness to some degree. That's why Bria it is the beginning of Yesh. We do call Bria Yesh Me'ayin. It's something from the nothing, which was the Eibishter before in Atzilus, but it's not Yesh Mamish. It doesn't really we call it the Efsharius of Yesh, the ability for there to be a something, but it's not really yet a something, which is why the angels there are really bittul. Kanod be'inyan chomer v'tzura v'tikun. There's the idea of the chomer, tzura v'tikun, which is another way of basically saying bria, tzir, and asiya, but it gives it a different name so we can understand it better. The chomer is the raw material. The tzura is the shape that you give this material. And the tikkun is like setting this material into action. So take, for example, you have, the material when it's still inside of a god, that's like Atzilus. That the would-be creation is nullified inside of the Eibusher, it doesn't feel itself itself. That's like silver inside of a mountain before you've mined it out. It doesn't even have a separate self. Once you mine the silver out of the mountain, you have like a blob of silver sitting next to the mountain. It's not a thing yet. It's really just like raw material taken out of its source. It's godly stuff that he's now going to be able to make a world with. But it doesn't feel itself truly to be independent. It's sitting by the mountain, its whole existence that he just took it out of the mountain, and that's kind of where it holds. It's a bria, it's just pure chomer. It doesn't even have a shape. Then what? You make a nice silverware set. You have spoons and forks, but they're just sitting there. They're not used. So even though it's a huge contraction right there, basically from Bria to Yetzira is this notion of all of a sudden really being a thing. Whereas before you were just a blob of unclear existence. So if the existence is not a particular existence, then it's really no existence at all. In other words, it's not pure godliness, it's now a type of godliness which is set aside to make worlds with, but since you haven't even made one entity, what kind of a world is that? It's still sort of an absence of self. And therefore, in the world of Bria, while it is a Yesh, it's not a Yesh Mamish. But when you form it, then boom, it's like you've created Mamish, a thing. But since it's a thing which is not busy doing anything, it's just like an abstract thing of a theoretical tree, a theoretical fork, but it's still not playing any role vis-a-vis one another. There's not like a world that it's sitting in the middle of and running around being busy doing things. It's just a theoretical. So therefore it still also has a certain ability to realize that it's godly. Much less because its thingness has become defined. But the next stage, all of a sudden you're taking that silverware set and you're eating your cereal and you're taking a tree and you're chopping it down, making firewood. It's like you're so lost, like a chicken with a head cut off, in the charade of worldly things, you don't even give thought for a second of where all these things came from. You're in the rat race. In other words, you're just running around doing things. You're totally clueless to that the fact that the materials and the formation of the materials came from the mountain. You're busy eating your cereal. The silver inside of the mountain is mamish not on your mind. It's nowhere near your mind. You don't even care where this thing came from. You're busy doing something else with it. So at that stage, that's an asiya. You just lose complete connection that this thing had any source at all.
Asiya then Bria, right?
Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, Asiya. Say it again.
I just wanted to establish the beautiful mashal, what the last two are.
So you have the fork in the air, is Yetzira, the theoretical fork which is not being used, and then you have chicken dinner, which is Asiya.
Yeah, all of this is still not in this world yet.
Asiya.
When you get to Asiya, there's also spiritual Asiya is the truth, and then there's a Gashmiistic Asiya.
So are we talking about spiritual?
Either way, right now he's probably talking about the spiritual Asiya, which means like there's a whole comings and goings and like means and ways going on, which is also spiritual. But those levels of angels, they're not doing so hot. In other words, there's a stage there where when even Beruchnius, they call it the Ayin Sari. We're going to get to it in a second. There's even like an angelic realm, which really feels like, that's what we call Elokim Acherim. Really, they're other gods. And even in their own estimation, they feel that they have been empowered to like control the solar system. And this one's empowered to control this nation. And these spiritual forces already feel themselves to be totally distant from Hashem.
They're tools, but they feel like they're independent.
That's right. Already in the spiritual world. That's like the spiritual world of Asiya. And then the whole thing sort of materializes into Gashmias. Gashmias is like another, ball worms all together.
The whole mirror
wax.
image of down to up, is that a Siyah
What's that?
The whole mirror image of Umata Lamaila? Is that a Siyah Gashmis to Siyah Ruchnis, or is it even higher?
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
So whatever happens down here goes on up there. Everyone has an angel making it grow. Everything.
Yeah, so that's from
parallel.
even from here all the way up.
Is that
No, from a Siyah Gashmi to a Siyah Ruchni, from a Siyah Ruchni to a
everything's mirroring
Siyah.
each
Everything.
other.
It's like one. Just what's the difference? It's all the same thing. It's just whether the source is revealed in it or not. It's basically that's what I'm saying. It's like just this role reversal. It's either light with those same vessels negated inside, or it's vessels with that same light negated inside. But it's ultimately it's all the same thing happening.
They have complete bittul.
What'd you say?
They have complete bittul.
In a sense, they have complete bittul. They don't like change their tafkid, but in the sense we're saying they have an opposite of bittul. They feel themselves to be powerful.
If they feel themselves, they can use that power independently.
No, they can't use it independently, but they feel that it's independent. In other words, they're not actually have free will, and they can go around and do what they want. But it's like the feeling they have is that they've been entrusted with powers, and Hashem sort of set them up, and He's going to sit in His throne somewhere, and they're going to wield these powers. The truth is, on the side of God, God is wielding these powers through them at every second. They don't have free, but their feeling is that they have free will.
It's like a servant of the master.
Right. But obviously, the servant of the master actually has free will, and that's how they feel. But the reality is that our master, he's doing the service through them. Right?
It's a tool. They're just,
it's like an axe in the hand of the woodchopper, right? You don't praise the axe because it's just doing what the woodchopper is doing. So Hashem is holding them, moving them, and every action that they perform, He's performing, not them. Chas v'shalom. He doesn't actually give over, but the feeling that they have, just like us, it's the same way with us. You think you're holding your glasses and we're scratching our head? We're not. The Eibuster is mamish floating through everything, and He's the one moving it. What? He's hiding Himself, and He gives the created being a feeling like He's doing it. So this is something that's happening already in the spiritual asiyah with these ayin sarim, these 70 ministering angels.
So our world is the body of the Geshmut of
Yeah. The truth is, our world is the gashmis of all these three worlds have, and four worlds in fact, they all come down and live in this world, but like in a way that it's almost we just have a sampling of each one. For example, man is a representation of Atzilus, but in a Gashmias form. Animal is a representation of Bria, but in a Gashmias form. Plants are a representation of Yitzira, but in a Gashmias form. So all those spiritual dimensions, while we have really no access to any of them on their own spiritual wavelength, in our little Gashmias suit, we receive all the different aspects of what's going on above, including the vast distinction of the four worlds, but in a miniature version inside of Gashmis. So there is an Atzilus of Asiya, and there's a Bria of Asiya. And again, this is man, animal, plant, and rock. Right? It's all in the realm of Asiya, so it's all, cut off. But even in this cut off realm, there's parts of us which are Atzilus, which is like the Yid inside of a Gashmias world. Right? And so forth.
It's interesting when you think about the Egyptians thinking that there was a god of this, a god of that, a god of the ocean or whatever. The tide is changing. It's really an entity that's changing the tide that thinks it's not a tool.
That's right. That's
So
why they
they're not
worship
that-
the other gods, because they themselves are like sort of taken advantage of by those gods themselves. In other words, the reason why they worship them is because even at the place of the thing they're worshiping, there's already a break and a feeling of disconnect. So the hashpah already goes on to the nations, like that. Those 70 sarim, they themselves are the energizing force which creates, let's say, the 70 nations. The 70 nations are a funneling down of divine energy, which goes through these 70 ministering angels. So since already at the stage of the 70 ministering angels, there's a brokenness feeling of self. How much more so when the energy is then output into the France, right, which creates that nation, that they for sure think they're a self, and not only that, but they want to worship this particular ministering angel because the angel thinks he has power. They for sure think he has power, right? And so they're trying to get the power out of that angel to beef themselves up. It's a big mamash delusion that Hashem created it in the world.
Are there idols idols are pretty much like angels, pretty much.
Yeah, they're angels. But the problem is that they're right. They think they're doing the job themselves.
You talk about the 70 nations. Is this connected to the 70 languages?
Same thing.
Is this ever enumerated? I mean, or elucidated? Like
Yeah.
what these 70? Like
For
this
sure.
is the one of 70. This is two of 70.
Sure.
And where would one
In the
find
Torah,
it?
all the language, all the nations in the story of Noach and the dispersion, they're all listed name by name by name.
Oh, so if you were to add those up, it'd be 70.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so anyway, when we go into Bia Gufa, in other words, Atzilus and Bia, clearly we know the difference. But even in the lower three worlds, you have this Inyan of Chomer Tzura Tikkun, which we said is like the whole mashal I gave with the spoon. The material, the formation, and then laying it into action. The Olam HaBriya Hu Rak B'chinas Efsharus HaYeshes. The world of Bria is just the potential for self. It's like that mound of silver sitting next to the mountain. It's not really a thing yet. It's the ability to make things, but it's not really a thing yet. So this is like the world of Bria. It's the least damaged goods.
In the mashal, what's going on in Atzilus?
Atzilus is if there's a world at all, it's inside of the mountain. It didn't come out yet. And really, there's no metal in the mountain. It's like there's mountain. You don't even pay attention to the metal in the mountain. It's the Eibishter.
Rabbi, could you repeat? It was Chomer and then what?
Tzura,
Sorry.
and then we call it Tikkun, which you could also say is a siyah. In fact, the word Tikkun, as he's going to say in a second, Asta Siporneha. There's a line in the Chumash which about the Eishes Yafes Toar, which it says she should do her nails, and then the translation is Tikkun. So Asiya and Tikkun is the same thing. It says Asher bara Elokim la'asos l'takein. The parish is he made the world to fix. In other words, Asiya and Tikkun is kind of the same thing.
So sorry, so Chomer would be Atzilus.
Bria,
Bria.
and then the Tzura, the formation is Yitzira, and the Tikkun is Asiya.
Thank you.
Dolma Bria Efsharus HaYeshu. It's only the ability to have self. Yitzira is his galus HaYeshus, but Yitzira, the formation, the revelation. That potential of self reveals itself as actual self when you have forms. You now have the theoretical tree, the theoretical spoon. It's revealed Yesh. It hasn't put Yesh into action yet, but it's revealed that this is something, a self. V'tikun hu b'chinas Asiya. And then the final level is Asiya, v'kamo asa v'takin. As we just said, there's translation of Aramaic of the word Asiya is takin. Shezeu b'chinas metzias hayesh. That's mamish, the real deal. You're not a theoretical form of your are, you mamish are. And again, the whole thing is a charade, because the reality is that the infinite light is totally negating you at every second. It's just that it's hiding from you. It's a power of the Eibishter that's hiding from you, Malchus, where he's showing his removedness. And when he shows his removedness more and more, it means you feel yourself more and more. But it's the Eibishter that's doing it. It's the power of God. So it's, in other words, it's a good hiding trick, but he's not actually hiding himself. He's just showing you a different aspect of himself, that he's beyond, infinitely beyond. Ikra Yeshus hu ba'olam atachtu. The main Yeshus, of course, is in the lowest world. Shezei wa'ideh helem v'hestra or lagamre. And what is this? This is when you get to Gashmias. That even in a Siyah Ruchnias, you have all the creations, the means and ways, Manhattan, everything's going, but it's Ruchnias. So the light is still, it's spiritual. Which means the light is still in some way there. Even the lowest of the spiritual worlds doesn't compare to this world where the light disappears. In other words, we are created in a full measure of that feeling of Malchus, that Hashem has fully removed himself, and the king is somewhere else. Right? Adon Olam, we're praying, master of the world, like he's not here. You look up in the sky and try and find him somewhere else, because the feeling is that he's not here. Because that's what a king is. You never see the king. The king is in this palace, behind the moat, and the guards, and you can't see the king. It's like if you see the king, it's like a miracle if you see the king. Once a year, Rosh Hashanah, you behold the king as he comes out on his balcony, but you don't see the king, because the king, that's the point, is in this world, the king represents that aspect of divinity which removes godliness entirely from our ability to see. Okay, now let's wrap it up. Where are we going with all this? This is all a discussion of how there's two different types of hashpah that come from the Eibishter to begin with. One is a hashpah misod shoresh. It's the idea that comes from the root. In other words, it is, if you trace the worlds back up, you get to the root of the worlds. And that's sort of as high as you go. So there's a pinnacle point, which is the root of the world, and when that flows out, it creates measured and limitedness, because that's what Hashem had in mind when he brought out the Kav Hamida, the measuring stick, which is going to delineate light to each and every world. It had enough light in it to delineate light of Atzilus, light of Bri, Yitzir, Asiyah, and every creation therein. So if you're going to go and try to reach the source of your light, you're going to only ever reach the source of the created worlds, because He's already set aside and designated a measured amount of light for all the worlds. So this is all this notion that we just talked about, that in Tzilus and Bri, there's a difference between them all, and each one has a certain measure of limited light, how much God is revealed, to the point that He's fully revealed in Atzilus, to the point that He's fully unrevealed in Asiyah. The fact is that all of those worlds are coming from a certain strand of godly light, which is called Shoresh. And what does it mean, Shoresh? It's Shenimdad, it's measured, it's measured how the light would be in all the worlds, already from the beginning. But in a way that it's designed to bring forth worlds. So therefore it already measures out all the worlds to begin with. And in general, this entire light, even from the top of it, it's only a ray of light. What does it mean, a ray of light? If it's a measured light, and the job of this light is to measure, that means the light itself to begin with is already only a fraction of the infinite light. Right? In other words, what does it mean, a ray of light? It means there's infinite light, and then you take a little piece of it, you measure out a little piece of it. So that idea of measuring out the little piece of light is because that light is then going to measure out light for all the rest of the worlds. So even in its source, therefore, it's only a measured light. Since it's just a ray of light, it's relevant to say that there's limitation attached to it. When you have the infinite light, you can't find limitation in an infinite thing. But if you're going to remove the infinite light and just take one beam of light, the beam has a beginning, the beam has an end, the beam has a width, a diameter, circumference. So it's already shaykh to talk about limitations in divine light once you start with a little ray of it. Which means that even in the very source of when this thing comes out, there's already a measure of concealment in it. Because it's already hiding infinity and bringing forth finite divine light. And then what? It just keeps getting smaller, and once it's measured, it can continuously measure itself and measure smaller and smaller amounts, and get more and more concealed, to the point that it gets totally concealed. It can remove itself entirely. To the point that it hides, and in its place, all you see is not divine light, but creation mamish. So all of this light from the bottom of it till the top, it is divine light. But it's measured divine light, which means you can have a tiny measure or a great measure, but it's all from beginning to end finite. Amnam, however, Hamshacha Shabasod Tosefis, that's only one aspect of Hamshacha that comes down from God. There's another dimension called Tosefis, which means an increase, something beyond the root of the worlds. And he Hamshacha Shalo Al Pi Maimer Kav Hamida. And what is this? Kol Tu Ephraim. This is a hamshacha that does not come from that pool of light. You can gain access to divine light, which doesn't come from there. It comes from the infinite pool. And yet also that can come down and make a presence in this place. In other words, it can't make this place to begin with. If you start with that light and try and make worlds, you don't make worlds. It's just divine. But once you hide it, and then you create worlds with the finite light, the whole series of worlds, now you got those worlds in place, it's possible from within any particular spot in the world to access the infinite light which precedes the Kav.
Is that Oraganuz?
It's even the Oraganuz, in truth, is in its source the finite aspect of light, because the Oraganuz is the 10 spheros inside of infinity. Oh, hold on a second. When you say the Oraganuz, there's two meanings. There's the Esser spheros Haganuzos, the 10 hidden spheros, and then maybe the Oraganuz you could say is mamish the Ein Sof. So it could be it could be the Oraganuz. Sorry, I was thinking
Makif.
It's Makif, yeah. And what is this? This means that even though a world, let's say, is defined by its measured light to the point that it's hiding all of its elokus, that's only according to the Kav HaMidah. That's only according to how the Shoresh, the root of it, has measured it out. But it's possible to reveal God even in a place where the Kav has determined that there won't be a revelation of God. And the only way to do that is you can't draw from the Kav, because if you draw from the Kav, you know what the Kav has in store for you. This much light and no more. So you have to draw from a place which is beyond the Kav, and then you can bring more light that was designated by the Kav into that place.
Does it come through the Kav?
Everything has to come through the Kav ultimately.
So you're drawing it from the Kav.
But there's the Panemius of the Kav. And that's what we said, remember in the beginning of this whole metaphor, we talked about how that if you were going to take this little mushal from the teacher, and he's going to come down to your level, he's going to explain to you the Orient soap and of apples and oranges, and you don't even know he's talking about the Orient soap, you're just talking about apples and oranges, or fire and water. Inside of that metaphor, in some deep way, is not only the deeper meaning of what the apples and oranges mean, but it's even the full-blown understanding of the Rav, which means that inside of the finite, because at the end of the day it is light, it is isness. Like we talked about the Hadinian of Havaya, and how Havaya through Elokim, Elokim does not conceal Havaya, it just enables Havaya to express itself in lower and lower places. So while we experience ourselves as the absence of Havaya and the full-blown Elokim because we're a thing, the truth is that this thing has a little bit of Havaya in it, otherwise it wouldn't have flushed out and it wouldn't be here at all. Havaya is the being. Elokim is the concealing of that being of thinking that it's God. But you still profit. The fact that you are means you've brought Havaya into that place. It's just you don't see Havaya. But since Havaya is in that place, what do I care if I have a little bit of being or a lot of bit of being? Once I have being, I can flush out that being and experience the full-blown Havaya. So through the Kav, as it were, you can reach the Panemius of the Kav, which is the Orient Sof.
So it's not from the Kav, but it's through the Kav.
It's through the Kav. Exactly.
Because once you take from the Kav, there's concealment.
Exactly.
What is isness?
Isness?
Yeah.
It's just what it sounds like. It's to is. To be.
No, but what you said that it is isness.
I'm saying that the Shem Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei, is the name of God, right? It is being. But the problem with being is that if you have all being at once, past, present, and future, up, down, right, left, north, south, you can't make out the individuality of the being. So it's just pure being. So that's like God. It's the name of God. Being. So what he does, in order to make it a little bit easier for us, is he contracts his being. So instead of seeing all of time and space at once, you see your time and your place, which means all the rest of the being is concealed from you. But the very fact that you have your sliver of being, it's also part of him. It's being. So from your little sliver, you can open, like we talked about in the other class, you can open up theoretically the full consciousness of the entirety of time and space from any point in time and space, because once you have is, once you are, then you are. In other words, you already have it. It's just what? I only have a little bit of existence. Once you have existence, ultimately you have all of existence. It's just that you have like a clouded view that you think your existence is limited. The reality is, since you have existence is unlimited. So in any place of that existence, you can reach its unlimitedness. But you need to draw from a different source. You need to draw from the Tosefes, from the infinite beyond the Kav. Yeah.
So when we're here in this world, and you said you've got the light of the Kav, which is now impossible to see.
Yeah.
Although it's still pointing to its source.
Well, no, it's not pointing to its source anymore, because you don't have the light of the Kav. It's hiding. It stopped expressing itself in a way of closeness, and it started expressing itself in a way of farness, because the Kalim took over, the non-recognizable Devekis, which is these vessels.
Okay.
That starts already in Bria.
But when we're here in this world, we experience spirituality. Are we are we discovering the Kav that's hidden?
Yeah.
Or are we discovering the Tosefet?
Well, first you go in order. First you meditate and you realize that, wait a second, there is a little bit of godliness, of a measured form at least, that's just making me be here. And from there, it's like one meditation after the next. First you meditate on the fact that Hashem is creating the world Yesh Ma'ayin, which means there's a sliver of light inside of me, there must be. And then from there, you start to meditate about higher and higher realms of divinity which are beyond the world. So that's what the Chassidus talks about, climbing this ladder. Climbing the ladder of prayer. It's like the idea of your meditations take you from one state to the next, ultimately to the point that you can actually be in the presence of true infinity, at least in a meditative sense. Yeah.
You know how many rabbis have used the term isness?
I'd be the first one.
Really?
I think so.
Business is his business.
What?
This is my business. All right, guys, we'll hold here. I never heard of this.